I'm Charlie Sykes. Welcome to the Contrary podcast. I have to say, yesterday I had the opportunity to write my newsletter with the headline, How the Young Right Lost Its Mind. We'll get to that in just a little while. Of course, J.D. Vance makes everything worse. Have you noticed that as a pattern, J.D. Vance? You know, whenever he weighs in, he takes a shitty situation and just makes it that much shittier. Well, listen, we've got a lot to talk about today. So we are joined again by our good friend, Tom Nichols, staff writer for The Atlantic. Welcome back, Professor. Ex-professor.
Thanks, Charlie.
Professor
Glad to be back.
Emeritus. Well, it's great to have you back. Look, there's so much to talk about. I mean, we're blowing up boats. We have the No Kings rally coming up this week. We have the peace deal, ceasefire deal in the Middle East. Donald Trump makes it very clear that America first really actually means Argentina first. You had a great tweet about that the other day. I want to talk about the young Republican bigots and the way that story's played out. But could we just start with the rather extraordinary development involving the media and the Pentagon? The Pentagon goes dark. Let me just read you this paragraph from Oliver Darcy's newsletter. In less than 24 hours, the Pentagon is set to carry out an unprecedented expulsion of the press, stripping virtually all news organizations from their badges that grant them access to the building. The move comes after virtually every news organization in the world declined to agree to a set of new draconian rules that Pete Hegseth forced upon them as conditions for maintaining a press pass. So, Tom, this is your area of expertise. By the time people listen to this, it's possible that the only credentialed reporter covering the Pentagon, the Department of War, will be OAN. Everybody else will be outside with their noses pressed up against the glass. What? Yeah,
I mean, defense and defense policy is an area of my expertise, but this is really a free speech and transparency issue. It makes it worse because it's the Defense Department. And if the Department of Agriculture said you have to sign all these papers or you can't report on, wheat yields, like it's, like the old Soviet Ministry of Agriculture or something, where people would roll their eyes and say, okay, whatever, But really, when it comes to national security and national defense, there is only, at least for what the government's doing, this one, 5-sided building that is where America's sons and daughters get their orders to go into harm's way. And Hegseth, I think this just proves what a small, insecure man Pete Hegseth is and how much he is really in over his head at the Pentagon. Because this isn't,
Trump is backing him on this. Now, this is now the official policy of the Department of Defense. That you have to say,
of course he is.
Yeah. The lack of understanding of the role of the press in a free society, the role of accountability is kind of breathtaking. I mean, I suppose we should have been prepared for it, but these draconian rules essentially say that the reporters can't actually do any independent reporting, can't publish anything that the Pentagon does not okay, doesn't write anything that is, I don't know, even remotely embarrassing. I mean, isn't the history of war and the history of defense, doesn't it underline the necessity of, in a democratic society, asking hard questions because things can go terribly wrong? When we look back, does anybody think, I wish the media hadn't asked more, tough questions during the Gulf War or during the war in Afghanistan? Boy, I wish the media had been kept out of writing anything negative about Vietnam or Korea. I mean, really, it is kind of breathtaking with any understanding of military history. And yet here we are.
We've come a long way from the days when it was a real innovation to embed reporters with military units in the field. This is just the Pentagon. And Hegseth has this, 17 pages of hoop jumps that really amount to him saying Pentagon reporters should just be stenographers. We'll give you a handout, you copy it down. But here's the thing. I take issue with you in one place, Charlie. You said that Trump and Hegseth, they have this real lack of understanding of the role of a free press here. I disagree. I think they absolutely understand the role of a free press, and they hate it. It's not like they don't get it. It's not like Pete Hegseth, who for years was a TV personality on a major network, It's not like they don't get the role of the free press. They get it. They just don't like it. And Hegseth especially, I think, doesn't like it because, first of all, the biggest source of the biggest Pentagon leak in recent history was, wait, let me just check my notes here, Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
But also the leaks, a lot of the leaks that are coming out of the building now, some of which are not even reportable because they're at the level of gossip. But they're about Pete Hegseth. And that's what he's trying to stop. There's no issue here. Look, reporters have always known since World War II that there are just some things when it comes to war and operations and classified information, there are things you can't write about or shouldn't write about or endanger, our kids out there. But this notion, like, you can't just bump into somebody in the Pentagon and say, hey, I'm working on a story. If you have something you want to talk about, give me a call. That is sorry, then, and what Hegseth has resorted to now is this false image of what Pentagon reporters do. And I have to say, full transparency, I'm a former Defense Department guy. I was never a Pentagon reporter, but I know many of them pretty well. They were never allowed to just randomly walk around the building without identification or going to classified areas or pick files up off people's desks. This was bullshit from the beginning. What Hegseth really doesn't care about who's getting access to the building. He cares about who's writing what about him.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, after you mentioned the leak when he, obviously for some reason shared war plans with your boss Jeffrey Goldberg at the Atlantic. I mean, that was the worst leak. So for Pete Hegseth to lecture the rest of us, including the media, on the need to stop leaks it is beyond absurd.
Well, it's a classic government move, the search for the guilty and the punishment of the innocent.
Well, the good story, I mean, the good aspect of this story is that the media, everyone in the media, the entire journalism community understands the red line that is being drawn here. And, there's no actual professional journalist who would have agreed to these. Now, OAN obviously is a propaganda outlet, but it's interesting when you look at the list of all of the media organizations that refuse to do it. I mean, it's across the ideological spectrum. You have the Washington Post, but also the Washington Times, the New York Times, the Atlantic, but also Fox News. So this was one of those moments. Okay. Can we just stop with that? I mean, how bad does it have to be that Newsmax says, no, I'm sorry, we are totally in the tank for MAGA, but that just seems a bridge too far. So this is the kind of collective action that I think that we've been looking for, that has been necessary to have. And they took a principled stand, and we'll have to see what happens here.
Yeah, I mean, Pete Hegseth is a uniter, not a divider. He's managed to put Newsmax, Fox, the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, all on the same side of an issue. That's pretty impressive coalition building right there. And I'll just foot stomp your point, Charlie. When Newsmax says, even we have lines we're not going to cross. And it really does tell you something about OAN that they were the ones who said, yeah, sign us up. We'll do that. And when no one else would. And I think actually, you and I are usually so gloomy. Can we say that this was a good day for democracy?
It was a very good day. There are these sort of green shoots out there that we've talked about before. The fact that so many airports are now saying, hey, by the way, that Kristi Noem video where she's
we're not doing that.
We're just not doing that. We're not going to do your partisan hackery, for people standing in line at TSA. Good for them. And many of them did it not because they're necessarily anti-Trump, who knows who they actually are, but because it's like, look, this is just completely inappropriate. This violates our policies. We're just not going to do it. We actually have standards, and we're not going to become complete toadies. That seems relatively positive. So let's.
I flew internationally last week, and I came back through Boston, my hometown area, and
they let you back in. Good omen.
They did. There was no guns were drawn, no phones were seized.
Yeah.
I was wearing the big nose though, and the Groucho thing. So
they didn't have to see your social media accounts because yours would be sketchy.
My password on my hand.
Yeah.
It was. It's a friend of mine pointed this out because he also was going through the airport at roughly the same time. You have to remember these airports. They're not run by, the MAGA faithful. They're run by local people. There are people that, go to work every day, and you get to Logan and you don't hear, you don't see a bunch of, red-hatted folks from Wyoming. You see and hear people talking about moving over there to get your baggage to move back. They're local. Nobody's got time for that. And I think, again, it's a good, so I was kind of looking around saying, now maybe somewhere at Logan, there's a Christine, like Max Headroom, I just dated myself there, didn't I? Yeah, but, in a corner, there's a Christine Nome head talking, but I didn't see it. And I think, it struck me. These are folks that have to go to work every day. They're from the local area. And like I said, they got a bunch of people they got to get through customs and immigration. And ain't nobody got time for any of that bullshit.
Yeah, no, that was a good sign. And by the way, going back to the fact that even Newsmax said no, I don't know whether we should connect the dots here, but there is a little bit of dissonance out there. There's a little bit of disturbance in the force when Marjorie Taylor Green is looking around at the Republican Party and say, you guys are kind of nutty. I mean, it's like, okay, excuse me. When Marjorie Taylor Green says, yeah, I don't know, some of the stuff seems way too extreme for me. I got to call out the hypocrisy and the feculence that I'm seeing here. And it's like, wait, it's Marjorie Taylor freaking Green, who, by the way, there's not a new Marjorie Taylor Green. I want people to curb their enthusiasm here, but get your take of what's going on there and whether it means anything.
Marjorie Jewish Space Lasers Taylor Green. That until now, but it suggests, Charlie, that one thing is that all of this other stuff, the Jewish space lasers and all the conspiracy stuff, it suggests that she knew all along what she was doing. That she didn't really believe any of that stuff. Now, whether that's true, I don't know. There's a really good, I'm going to direct people. I'm going to flog my magazine for a minute and say that there's a really good profile of her a few months back in the Atlantic that I really think people ought to read. But either she didn't really believe that stuff, or she's decided that stuff just doesn't play in her hometown anymore. And now, and there's also that third possibility that people keep bringing up about her, which is that after Trump kind of said, we need you in the House, and squashed her dreams of some kind of statewide run, Senate or governor or something, that she said, okay, fine. It's every man for himself now. But in either way, I mean, it is, once again, kind of like Hegseth getting everybody on the same side. Here's you and me saying, hey, Marjorie Taylor Green, she's making a lot of sense these days because she is saying things that are pretty much straight up sensible about the Republicans. Now, I agree with you. I doubt this is a new Marjorie Taylor Green. I think, that one of the hallmarks of the MAGA movement has been to go, a lot of people just, tack with the wind and adjust their sails, doing what they got to do to stay in office. But it's got to be pretty... it's got to be pretty uncomfortable for the administration to have one of its top cheerleaders now, as you say, kind of like Newsmax and the others now looking and saying, hey, you guys are going a little far here, aren't you? This isn't working out here.
Well, the thing I'm not going to go so far as to say she's making sense because that's but I have to say that I thought it was very interesting when she called out, all the weak men in the Republican caucus, because we have been talking about this for years, what a bunch of dickless wonders. I mean, one of these leaders after another, engaging in self-gelding. And it's one thing for us. And then she's turning around and going, you guys are weak. You guys are a bunch of wimps. And I have to say that I did experience a bout of schadenfreude. Okay, so there's other bigger things to talk about, but I want to talk about something that you tweeted out, that you highlighted. which I think is just one of there's so many weird stories that, you would say the weirdest story of the week, like, take a pick. So there was this press available, maybe it was a meeting of the cabinet, and someone asked Trump, what is the benefit for the U.S. in helping Argentina? Because in case people have missed this, the U.S. government is shut down. We don't have enough money for healthcare, a variety of things. We are laying off U.S. employees right and left, but we are about to bail out the regime in Argentina. So ask, what's the benefit to the United States in helping Argentina? Trump. Just helping a great philosophy take over a great country. We don't have to do it. It's not gonna make a big difference for our country. Mr. Nichols, what happened to America first?
And also, it's an old joke, Charlie, but 20 billion here, 20 billion there. Pretty soon you talk about some real money.
Big money. Yeah.
Big money. And this is, I think, first of all, it really underscores how much Donald Trump thinks as president that everything in America belongs to him, including the Treasury. So he doesn't look at it as $20 billion of taxpayer money that could go to extending, going to an issue Marjorie Taylor Green keeps bringing up, Obamacare and extending the ACA subsidies and, the things that people in her rural district actually need. Instead, he says, it's 20 billion bucks. I got that lying around here. I can help you out.
I got a friend in Argentina, if you're a right wing regime and you suck up to me and you show up at CPAC, I'm gonna throw you a few $billion.
I got an envelope here that can help you out. Because again, he doesn't think of it as, he thinks of that as his money. He doesn't think of it as money that was handed over by you and me and by people working in restaurants and bars and factories and department stores. He thinks that's his money. And a buddy of his who said nice things about him needs a little cash to get to kind of make it through payday. And he's going to hand him an envelope and say, pay it back when you can. And, this is, and he says it point blank. I know we always do this and it's tiring, but imagine if Barack Obama or Joe Biden had handed $20 billion to somebody to say, no, there's nothing in it for us. It's just a good ideology that I happen to like. Yeah. We're with this. I'm giving it to this, I'm giving it to the Prime Minister of Canada because he's a handsome liberal. I'm giving it to Trudeau because I like the cut of his jib. People would lose their minds, and rightfully so. $20 billion in the middle of a government shutdown is a lot of effing money.
You would think so. Okay, so I do want to get to the young Republican bigots and J.D. Vance, but this leads me to the Mideast deal because we're talking about envelope stuff with cash. There is a school of thought out there, of course, that Donald Trump was uniquely the right person at the right time for this deal, because in the Middle East, his transactional thuggery just helps him fit in, right? It's the Qatar knows how to play the game. They give him an airplane. They get a military facility in return for all of that. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are, making crypto deals with UAE, all of that. So your sense of where we're at on the Mideast deal, and I want to read this because you may know that I have staked out a contrarian, rather negative view of the whole thing. But The Economist had a quick update on how the ceasefire is going, the Gaza ceasefire. And keep in mind, there's 20 points. The phase one was the release of the hostages. And then there's a lot of, but we're going to have to negotiate all the rest, which are somewhat complicated. So The Economist reported almost immediately, the ceasefire has brought the first alarming sign of how the broader peace deal might implode. Hamas fighters have emerged armed and in uniform to reassert themselves in the streets of Gaza City. The benign explanation is that in order to implement the first stage of the ceasefire, Hamas must be in control of the parts of the cities so it can carry out the hostage release. That's bullshit. But far from signaling magnanimous goodwill, which we never expected from Hamas. Hamas has started settling scores with killings and kidnappings of members of local clans who have tried to carve out their own fiefs. In fact, we have these scenes of public executions. So Hamas is still there. It is still armed. It is still killing people. It's wonderful that the hostages are home, but this is we're in your wheelhouse now. Give me your sense of all of the, I would say, exuberant optimism we saw earlier this week versus the actual facts on the ground.
Yeah, I'll start by saying the limitation on my expertise here is that I'm, I talk a lot about foreign policy, but I'm not a Middle East guy. No. So I'm looking at this also in some way as an outsider. But it seems to me that the thing that really unlocked this was Netanyahu foolishly attacking Qatar and carrying out that raid.
Interesting.
And that opened the door to a lot of stuff because I think that was a terrific strategic blunder. Let's give not 3 cheers, maybe 1 cheer for at least some of the diplomacy in the Trump administration, that they were able to capitalize on that and not screw it up. Which, I think is, yeah, I mean, look, Trump, kind of like a relief pitcher, right? I mean, Trump gets credit for the win, at least some credit for the win. But the only thing I see that's a win is getting the living hostages back. I don't think that's going to end very much of anything else. God rest his soul. I had a colleague at the Naval War College, a brilliant man named Michael Handel, who used to say, whenever he was asked, he would say, he was an Israeli himself, and he'd say, well, I am sure of this, there will be strife in the Middle East. And
not going out on a limb there.
Yeah, Michael's answer was there will be conflict in the Middle East. And I think, as you point out, look, Hamas isn't gone. The people of Gaza are still in a terrible situation. You can argue about whether the Israelis, have re-empowered what's left of Hamas. On the other hand, they've destroyed most of Hamas, but that still leaves the people in Gaza at the mercy of, as you pointed out, people in the streets in uniforms. I think what's going to happen here is that the Trump administration, as it is prone to do, is going to take this as a box check, because these things only matter insofar as they reflect glory back on Donald Trump. So they're going to take this as a box check, mission accomplished. I've solved another war. The hostages are home, and they're going to move on, and they're not going to care very much what happens next.
Yet what happens next is the hard part. I mean, the infinitely hard part. It's almost a cliche to say that, but first of all, the Mideast is still the Mideast. The reconstruction of Gaza, under the best conditions is infinitely complicated. But we don't have the best conditions. We have some of the worst malign, bad faith actors on the planet intimately involved in all of that. What could go wrong? Oh, my God. And if Trump just simply moves on, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, literally within a week, we could have, Netanyahu begin bombing again, right? Say they violated the terms, they're not going along with it, and we're going to start up again, because we've had ceasefires before. People, I know that nobody has any, muscle memory here, but Joe Biden actually did help negotiate a ceasefire that resulted in the release of, I think, 100 of the hostages, and that ceasefire didn't last. So again, we have a ceasefire, not a peace deal.
Well, and it's a lot easier. One of the truths in war is it's a lot easier to get a ceasefire when both sides are exhausted.
Yes,
and both sides see some value in just catching their breath at some point. And I think, as you point out, what comes next is the hard part. But that's never been something that doesn't interest Trump. Details bore him, and I hate to sound like Trump by saying, well, we're going to see what happens. We'll look at it 2 weeks. But I still think that the nature of Trump's diplomacy is to go in, solve it, then let other people come in and, make their deals and make money and whatever they're going to do that benefits them and people around Trump. But the idea that somehow this is going to be, now we have, dedicated attention paid to this. And there's one other thing that we have to bear in mind here, Charlie. Netanyahu has a personal political survival interest.
I was just going to ask you that next. Yes.
Letting this thing peter out. Part of the reason this war went on as long as it did, and here I suppose you could give some credit to Trump again to say, this is finally the guy that was willing to say to Netanyahu, I've had enough of you.
No.
I'm fed up with this. Instead of trying to work with him or placate him somehow. But Netanyahu, part of the reason this war dragged on is it was in Netanyahu's interest to let it drag on.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed in that.
Peace means that Netanyahu will, A, probably lose power, B, might end up going to jail. He has a massive incentive not to have this war come to an end, politically and legally.
Right. That's part of the reason it went on for so long.
Well, let's talk about sort of move on to other things that obviously Trump was deeply disappointed he did not win the Nobel Prize. Probably figures he definitely deserves the Nobel Prize now. But on Friday, Volodymyr Zelensky is coming to Washington to meet with Trump. Now, Trump is still in this I can solve anything mode, and he's been at least suggesting the possibility of giving Ukraine Tomahawk missiles, which seems to, and correct me if I'm wrong, seems to uniquely bother the Russians, where the Russians have really, raised the red flag. The Tomahawk missile, well, tell me why they are so concerned and whether that would be a game changer, because this now seems to be the biggest card that Trump has to play. Hey, Vladimir, you've been fucking me over. You've been screwing me around. I might give the Ukrainians the Tomahawk missiles. So talk to me about the Tomahawk missile.
Okay, so now we are in my nerd wheelhouse. Let's talk Tomahawks. Tomahawk missiles are very capable cruise missiles that hypothetically can have a range of as far as 1,500 miles.
1,500
the versions
miles
that we have now, think about 900 to 1,000 as more reasonable, but dual capable, can carry a nuclear warhead, hugs the ground. So even though they are subsonic and you can shoot them down, they're hard to spot because they're small and they come in low. And there's a psychological issue to this, which is that during the Cold War, Tomahawk, or as the Russians called it, Tomahawk, that was like a real boogeyman. The Tomahawk was one of the weapon systems that really worried them, because that's the thing that, could show up deep inside Soviet territory without them knowing it. We used to joke that back during the Cold War, people had studied this stuff, that there just weren't enough farmers standing in enough fields with shotguns to shoot them all down, because they fly about as fast as a jetliner. You just like the Soviets are like, oh my God, we're going to have to, stand there with squirrel guns. So the system really bothers them because it has Cold War overtones to it. But it also is a very capable system. And yeah, it will, since you were the first one to drop an F-bomb, I guess I'll follow you in and say it will fuck up their lives. And which is not to say, look, the Ukrainians already have other systems. The Brits provided some long range similar missiles. The Ukrainians have a native version that they're producing. But it is a symbol. It's not just a more capable system. It's a symbol of a greater American investment in the outcome of this war. And I think
so. It would be a significant escalation.
Yeah, it's an escalation in the sense of a political escalation. I don't think it adds that much more, except that it's an escalation in the sense that the old Soviets, the new Russians, because remember, Putin's always an old Soviet guy and at heart, has said, listen, we've bullshitted around about a lot of things. This will really bother me. And
he's made that very clear.
I think the Americans rightly look. For the first 6 months of this war, I was a go slow guy. I was very much supportive of Biden's approach of don't muddy the waters, don't send in a lot of Western systems. Don't. Yeah. But in this case now, Putin's the boy who's cried wolf too many times and saying no, this is the new red line. Now, with all that said, will we really do it? Yeah. The problem is that Trump was asked about this, and as you know, Trump never says no to a hypothetical. Right. I mean, you could get on Air Force One and say, Mr. President, you're going to provide Ukraine with B-2 bombers and Minutemen missiles and hydrogen bombs. And he'd say, well, I have the right to. I'm thinking about it. I'm looking at it strongly. We might not. Maybe we will. I mean, he answers all hypotheticals that way. So whether or not this actually is a policy change, I'll believe it when I see actual Tomahawks going to Ukraine. But then, it's going to get bumpy. The Russians are really going to react to that. I mean, again, what does that mean? They will provoke NATO more. They will do more border violations. They will murder Ukrainians at an even greater clip to try to get them not to do this. But maybe in this sense, we all share Donald Trump's frustration with Vladimir Putin. Now, part of the reason Putin is this way is because Donald Trump taught him to be this way by sucking up to him and by, enabling him and defending him and talking about what a great guy he is and what great friends they are. So I'll believe it when I see it, but yes, it's an escalation. It's a different kind of system, and it's a system that has a serious psychological impact on people old enough to remember the Cold War.
Okay, so technical question, and this is based on something I heard out of the Russians, which is that the Tomahawk missiles obviously are not just an escalation for the reasons you described, but also because they would require American personnel, American troops to operate them. Is that the case?
That, my level of technical knowledge about how to operate a Tomahawk is pretty low at this point. So
mine's zero,
I don't know if that's true. I doubt it. I doubt that. I think what the Russians are trying to say is, see, this is going to be an escalation because they're going to be Americans directly involved.
And I can't see Trump doing that. See, that's where I would think that America is going to, that Trump is going to talk about. So speaking of blowing things up, the one thing that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth can blow up with apparently with impunity are boats in the Caribbean. We have another boat, 6 people killed. And once again, I'm struck by the fact that we never get much information about who they are. You would think that there would at least they would go through some steps of saying, these are the individuals, this is our evidence, this is nothing. So I don't know what the body count is among Venezuelans. The president of Colombia, an ally of ours, said that there were Colombian citizens who were blown up, but we haven't gotten any more evidence of or information about that. But again, your thoughts on this, because there seems to be little or no sanction in international law for just blowing up boats that we could otherwise interdict.
First, let us note that Donald Trump is puzzled why he can't get a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, it's a mystery.
When you are ordering the U.S. military to engage in extrajudicial execution of people on the high seas by blowing their boats to smithereens.
Problematic.
The Peace Committee frowns on this.
Yes.
This is not normally, I'm sure, Trump is thinking, if Henry Kissinger could get one, I can get one. Mm-hmm. But, normally just blowing up civilian maritime ships, really looked down upon by things that call themselves peace committees. I think these are not legal orders. I think these are a violation not only of international law. Look, it's important to remind people that you and I were once and are still conservatives, and that I don't sweat a lot of international law. In fact, I was going through some old editorial cartoons about Ronald Reagan that I kept for years. And one of them was Reagan, they off-screen flashing, mooning the International Court of Justice about mining the Nicaraguan harbors. Remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
We were found guilty of mining the harbors, and the Reagan administration said, boo-hoo, we don't care. There's a part of me that says international law doesn't really work that well, unless, and here's the kicker, unless we are signatories to these treaties and agreements, in which case they become the law of the land of the United States. International agreements, international treaties, for you legal beagles, it's Missouri v. Holland, 1922. Treaties are the law of the land. So Trump is not only violating the law, he's violating American law, because he's conducting military operations under an imperial interpretation of Article 2, which says I can kill anyone I want with the military. The U.S. and once again, right, just like his money that he's sending to Argentina, the U.S. military belongs to me. It is not George Washington's military, where we are, I am the temporary commander-in-chief and steward of the most powerful force in the world. This is my army, my militia, my guys, my generals, and they do what I tell them. And we've come a long way from the 2016 debates when he said, well, if I tell them to torture, they'll do it.
I remember that.
Remember that? And he said, the generals will do what I tell them to do. Well, apparently we're now at the point where, because back then generals and a lot of other people pushed back and said, they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Because that's against the law. We're now to the point where, yes, he's proving the admirals in the Navy will do what they're told to do, even if those orders are
okay. This is a huge point, because I think that there's a little bit of wishful thinking out there that there's at some point you will have members of the military who will say, Mr. President, I cannot obey that unlawful order, or will push back, or will resign. In the case of these extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean, to your point, there is no pushback. There is no indication at all in the chain of command that anyone is saying, no, I'm sorry, I don't know who's in that boat. I think that would be unlawful to kill those people. Nothing. The admirals, everyone down, has basically saluted and followed the order. This is a significant and ominous development.
This is why he fired the top military lawyers
right away.
Because there are still military lawyers, and I'm sure several of them are saying this is pretty shaky stuff. But the people who would be the top, the people that would give them top cover aren't there anymore. The people that are supposed to walk in and tell not just the president, but the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Naval Operations, Southcom, to say this isn't going to pass the smell test. You can't the president does not have the unilateral authority to declare people terrorists and then execute them at will. And some of the folks in MAGA world keep going back to Obama killing an American citizen overseas, which was a different. And I warned that this was going to happen. That they were going to use this as an excuse, because that was a pretty tough case. But Obama was acting under congressional authorization. He'd made the case that this person was identified, known to be in this activity, couldn't be apprehended, couldn't be stopped, had to be taken out. These are like, we just killed a bunch of guys on the boat. Who were they? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they were drug dealers. Maybe they were gang members. Maybe they were fishermen. We just do not know, and we don't have any of the names. Okay, so in the few minutes we have left, I have to talk to you about J.D. Vance. I want to get your take on J.D. Vance.
Must we?
Because that's kind of the way I feel. It is interesting, that J.D. Vance, makes almost everything worse. I mean, when he was on with George Stephanopoulos over the weekend, he's asked about Tom Homan and the $50,000 in cash. By the way, that story is not going away, which is kind of interesting to me. There's a couple of stories that have some stickiness, and he just blustered his way through this. But I want to talk about the young bigots of the GOP story, and everybody's heard this story by now. Politico broke this story. Leaders of young Republican groups throughout the country worried what would happen if their Telegram chat ever got leaked. But they kept typing anyway, referred to black people as monkeys and watermelon people, mused about putting their political opponents in gas chambers. They talked about raping their enemies, driving them to suicide, lauded Republicans who they believe support slavery. William Hendricks, the Kansas City Republican vice chair, used the N-word, several variations of it, more than a dozen times. Bobby Walker, the vice chair of the New York State Young Republicans, referred to rape as epic. Peter, his name is Ginta, who at the time was chairman of the New York Young Republicans, wrote in a message that everyone that votes no is going to the gas chamber. Okay, so look, how should Republicans react, with panic and then with introspection? The National Young Republicans, I think, reacted very quickly and forcefully, said that everybody involved in this needs to go. It is disgraceful. They need to resign. And yet, so again, almost every human being on earth says this is unacceptable. You need to do something about it. Most responsible Republicans said, get rid of them. And then the vice president of the United States weighs in. And I just want to emphasize,
Not so
J.D.
fast.
Vance. Yeah, J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, could have did not have to weigh in on this controversy. He could have been busy with the Mideast peace, with the government shutdown. Instead, though, he dismissed the whole controversy as pearl clutching. And he did the sort of hackish whataboutism, pointing to this controversy about the Democratic candidate for Attorney General in Virginia who had some, musing about, shooting a political opponent, which, by the way, is terrible. It's awful. No, I'm not going to offer any defense. But Vance refused to join in the condemnation of these trolls who praised Adolf Hitler, described the NBA as monkey play ball, and says that this is nothing but, it's a college group chat and, not as bad as this other thing, and referred to it as pearl clutching. I mean, on Earth 2.0, you either don't weigh in or you reaffirm your commitment to non-bigotry or you back up the Young Republic. I mean, I'm sorry. Since I've already dropped the F-bomb, what the actual fuck is going on in J.D. Vance's mind?
What's that line from a famous stand-up comedian? I have the right to remain silent. I just don't have the ability.
Yeah.
That, Vance didn't have to weigh in on this, but he does if he's thinking about when Trump is out of the way and I'm the new standard bearer, these young guys are going to be my boys because they'll remember that I stood up for them against, the woke weenies and pearl clutchers. The person I thought that had one of the best comments at what's that?
You're exactly right.
Yeah, he knows. I mean, he's he's farming support for the future, from guys that, 2-3 years from now, be a few years older, get out there and start, phone banking or whatever they're going to do for him. David French, I think, had one of the best comments on this. And I even pulled it up because it really struck me as true. He says, none of this is remotely surprising. It's in-group signaling. You show your commitment to the cause through your disregard of basic decency. And where I want to bring that back to Vance is, yes, young men do this. Look, Charlie, when I was 19 years old, I said I'm so glad social media and phones didn't exist. I said a lot of terrible shit when I was 18, 19 years old, and I was in college, and I thought it was fun to be shocking and transgressive. And, I grew up in a working class home where we said a lot of inappropriate things, right? But the way young men learn to not be that way is that older men tell them not to be that way. And they set those guardrails up and they say, look, I was young once too. Stop being an asshole. This is terrible.
Exactly. Right.
This is time.
I can remember having conversations like that. Absolutely.
I get it. You're 19. You think it's funny to say you like Hitler. You have no idea what you're saying, what you're talking about. You just think it's a gas. You think it's a joke. It's shocking. But okay, now it's time to put on your big boy pants and stop being a jerk. And instead, Vance came out and said, my man, my boys, I got your back.
He sees them as a constituency.
Of course he does.
A constituency that he has to defend. Well, I think that this is a really important insight because J.D. Vance apparently has made the decision that he is not going to be outflanked on the right no matter how far it goes. And so it's the wink wink to it's a wink wink to the Nick Fuenteses out there that don't worry, I'm never going to go weenie on you. I'm never going to clutch my pearls no matter what you say. And I do think that he thinks he's banking goodwill, but you would think in a normal world that you'd be reluctant to do that, knowing that there's a potential of alienating everyone else. But the Republican Party as a whole has become so supine. It has stopped. I mean, we're here today because all of the referees, all of the grown-ups who used to set the limits have either disappeared or have just figured, hey, just keep our heads down, right? There's nobody who's going to excommunicate them anymore, which is why
what has the Republican electoral and political system taught J.D. Vance? Remember, he was losing to a guy who was Josh Mandel, who was really
pretty bad.
Just this Roman candle of offensive bullshit every day, right?
Vile.
And Vance simply couldn't get on his right. He couldn't capture that, the crazy vote. And then Trump rides in and says, this is my guy. And he lifts him at the last minute over Mandel. I think, just like Tucker Carlson saying, the way I stay in the public consciousness is be as crazy as I need to be to keep the cameras on and the money coming in. Vance has said, I'm never going to let that happen to me again, because that was a near-death experience for Vance. And the thing that saved him was having Trump endorse him, and that he had to finally get over to where Mandel was and say things that were equally disgusting and crazy. And when you said he's not going to be outflanked on the right, the word I had, he's not going to be outflanked on the disgusting wing of the right. That he figures, hey, votes are votes, right? I mean, nobody asks you on primary day. And that's the other thing, right? All he has to do is survive a Republican primary. He doesn't, as far as he's concerned, that's a lock once he gets past being Trump's successor. And so, there's simply nothing. This is
actually a very dramatic tell. This is really a tell of his read of the political environment and what it takes to flourish in even the post-Trump political environment. This is not just some side story. This is what the Vice President of the United States believes about the dynamics of Republican primary elections in politics.
And is he wrong?
No, he's not wrong. But we'll find,
and there's the heartbreak, isn't it? But it also shows you the utter emptiness of J.D. Vance, a guy that just, years ago was talking about, we keep repeating it, and I know, it's a trope now, but Trump, J.D. Vance, the guy who called Trump cultural heroin, the guy who called Trump potentially America's Hitler, has said, okay, but I've been to the Emerald City. I like it. Again, I think so many people, I know I sound reductive when I say this, but so many people in this administration and so many people around Trump say to themselves, where would I be if not for this? Right?
Well, absolutely. That's not reductive. That's descriptive.
I get picked up in the morning. People bring me coffee. A limo drives me to work. People are courtiers to me all day. And if I weren't here, what would I be doing? And J.D. Vance would be, first of all, J.D. Vance not going to go back to Ohio. That was a temporary solution to, his Senate run problem. Where would J.D. Vance be? Probably in, one of the hated blue states, being, making money again. That's boring. And I think, for once you've tasted that life and you've been inside that circle of power, not just inside the Beltway, we always talk about inside the Beltway, but just inside that federal triangle that's even smaller than the Beltway, you're not going back. And I think Vance has decided whatever it takes is whatever it takes.
We need a new phrase for that, because you're exactly right. It's the inside the Beltway is an obsolete term. We need to have the inside whatever it is, inside that little sack of scorpions and snakes and frogs that where
Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, it's it's like Pennsylvania from That's it. I mean, you could, the kind of number of people that are the problem here, you could almost contain, from Independence up to Lafayette Square. I mean, it's really, I sometimes bristle at inside the Beltway because, having been there, I'm always reminded that there are a lot of people serving their country and doing good work and trying to get things done inside the Beltway. People who think that it's good to have their federal checks arrive and to have the airports open and to have international trade going and have their passports work. All that happens because of stuff that happens, air quoting, inside the Beltway. The bigger problem is in a much smaller, tighter circle between 1600 and Capitol Hill.
So I'm going to work on that, although I'm trying to resist coming up with a really gross description because that's not this kind of a podcast. Tom Nichols, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your time and for your insights. Always good to have you, Tom.
Thank you, Charlie.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of To the Contrary podcast. We will continue to do this for the duration because, as you know, it is essential now, well, it's always essential to remind ourselves that we are not the crazy ones.